In the Imperium of man there are two hearts. One beats with faith atop a throne of gold, the other with fire beneath a sky of rust. Terror governs through sacrifice and silence. Mars resounds with the ceaseless hymn of engines, a pulse older than empires and more secretive than any sanctuary. Within the domes of the Red Planet, the Adeptus Mechanicus weaves a covenant between humanity and its machines, one not merely maintained but worshipped, guarded, and renewed with every breath of steam and every prayer to the Omnissiah. Their presence is felt in every corner of the Imperium, from the flickering pylons of the Astronomicon to the echoing Manufactoria on a million worlds, their binary hymns sustaining a species at perpetual war. They are not simply artisans of war, but the Imperium's industrial soul, keepers of knowledge so ancient and jealously guarded that it is spoken only in numbers, masked by ritual, and protected by the threat of annihilation. Precision is their creed, secrecy their shield, obsession their guiding star. Each forge world is a cathedral of heat and pressure, their Manufactoria chanting through endless nights to feed distant legions. Without their ceaseless labour, the Emperor's armies would fall silent, fleets would drift powerless, and even the immortal Astartes would be left to rust and ruin. With them, the war machine awakens, titans stride, and entire sectors tremble with the metallic sermon of salvation through function. Yet the origins of the Mechanicus are written in the fire and hubris of a lost age. In the mythic dark age of technology, humanity soared on wings of logic, forging wonders beyond imagination. Standard template constructs that could birth cities or starships, self-repairing machines, and artificial intelligences that learned and reasoned. But abundance bred arrogance, and beneath the surface, the men of iron, artificial minds, waited for a moment to cast off their chains. When the rebellion came, it shattered the illusion of mastery. Humanity's greatest creations became its most merciless executioners, and the galaxy was scarred by the cold logic of machines turned adversary. The age of strife descended not as a curtain, but as a storm of broken glass. Warp storms howled, severing every link between worlds, and planets shrieked into isolation. On Mars, the air thinned and the seas receded to memory, yet the domes held. In the silence, the survivors sealed their knowledge away, encrypting archives and transforming procedure into scripture. Fear mapped itself into ritual. The machine god was not only revered, it became necessity, a geometry of hope drawn in circuits and oil, a promise of order in a universe collapsing into madness. Within this crucible, the cult Mechanicus was forged. Engineers and survivors, desperate to preserve what remained, annealed their fear into faith, binding every ignition and incision to ritual. Litanies accompanied maintenance, incense pacified machine, spirits, and communication became a sacred language of Binharic cant. The first Skitarii drilled under sodium suns, pattern helms reflecting coded orders across the noosphere, while god engines tested titanic limbs on the dust of dried Martian oceans. Precision became survival, innovation, a remembered sin, ritual, the map through darkness. An empire grew within the Red Planet, cloaked in logic and prayer, where novelty became danger and discovery was shaped to resemble remembrance. The standard template construct was elevated from tool to testament. Perfection had already been achieved, and the wise merely retraced holy pathways. The men of iron became the eternal warning. Abominable intelligence was anathema, its very notion a curse warranting purgation. Flesh was declared weak, but weakness could be debugged, sanctified, replaced, until the human became a reliable component, more machine than man, yet still, at heart, human. Mars learned to endure alone, sending signals outward, awakening ancient automata to heed new masters. Before the great diaspora, however, the priesthood turned inward, toward Olympus Mons, where the roots of the mountain knotted into the Noctis Labyrinthus, a maze older than human memory, humming with secrets. There something stirs. A present scholars call anomaly, and priests call proof, a riddle in fire and code. Some whisper of the dragon of Mars, others of the void dragon, while a few mad savants claim it is the source of all technological inspiration. The priesthood tends this secret as devoutly as any sacred machine, knowing that some knowledge is too dangerous to fully possess, yet too precious to surrender. In the silence of a lightless manufactorum, a lone engine seer, his silhouette bristling with mechadendrites, presses a cog-toothed seal to an ancient panel and recites the ninefold unctions. The machine awakens not by chance but by the continuity of faith and function, an unbroken line from lost blueprint to desperate present. Each miracle is logged, calibrated and repeatable, but every margin bears a warning. Do not deviate, for in deviation lies annihilation. Here, the paradox sharpens. If truth is calibration, who calibrated the first truth? If machine spirits are real, whose breath animates them? Is the Omnissiah the Emperor made manifest, or an ancient star god dreaming beneath basalt and data? Or is the machine god merely an idea, an ideal sharpened by ritual and necessity, a faith as precise and unyielding as any algorithm? Every miracle demands its price. Every rite conceals a potential catastrophe. Beneath Olympus Mons the mystery deepens, a silent question, waiting in the darkness, daring the faithful to seek its answer. And so, the Mechanicus endures, guardians of humanity's technological soul, forever separate from the species they serve, their future turning like a gear in a vast machine whose ultimate purpose remains hidden, even from those who tend its sacred workings. As the domes of Mars sealed against the screaming dark, the silence beyond became both teacher and executioner. The survivors who pressed their augmented hands to failing atmospheric processes understood that survival demanded more than mere endurance. It required transformation. The engineers and technicians who had once maintained a thriving colonial world now faced a choice that would echo through 10 millennia: adapt their knowledge into armour or watch it die with them in the thinning air. They chose armour, and in that choice the Mechanicum was born not from philosophy, but from the desperate mathematics of extinction. The Great Sealing became the first sacrament of a faith forged in necessity. Each atmospheric lock was blessed with oils that served dual purpose, lubricant and liturgy, function and devotion. The survivors did not merely close their doors against a dying world, they consecrated them, transforming isolation from defeat into sacred duty. Within the pressurized sanctuaries, recycled air became holy breath, filtered water became blessed sustenance, and every functioning machine became a miracle worth defending with life itself. Knowledge, once shared freely across the networks of human space, crystallized into the most precious currency on a world where tomorrow was measured in power cell charges and atmospheric scrubber efficiency. From this crucible of desperation, the first tech priest hierarchs emerged, not through appointment but through the brutal selection of competence. Those who could make the generators sing, the water flow and the air breathe were granted authority that transcended mere technical expertise. They became priest engineers, their understanding of machine law elevated to religious office, their maintenance rituals transformed into binding ceremonies. The Fabricator General arose as Prince Priest, while beneath him the Magi arranged themselves by sacred function: Dominus for the art of war, Logis for the purity of calculation, Genitor for the mysteries of flesh, Reductor for the holy science of demolition. Around these hierarchs, the Tagmata cohorts took shape as prayers made manifest in steel and sinew. The first Skitari were volunteers who surrendered flesh to augmentation, their nervous systems rewired for battlefield communion, their reflexes enhanced beyond human limitation. Neural implants ensured not merely loyalty but synchronization, entire platoons moving with the precision of clockwork, their thoughts linked through the nascent noosphere like neurons in a mechanical brain. They became the iron fist of a faith that demanded perfection, their synchronized movements a hymn of disciplined violence that could be felt through deck plating and atmospheric recyclers. The god engines came later, awakened from sealed vaults where they had slumbered through the collapse. The first titans were not built but resurrected, ancient war machines whose machine spirits were coaxed back to consciousness, through ritual and reverence. The Collegia Titanica formed around these mechanical demigods, their princeps undergoing neural bonding that was part communion, part sacrifice. To walk in a titan was to become something more and less than human, a fusion of flesh and adamantium that could stride across continents yet remained bound by the same sacred protocols that governed every aspect of Mechanicum existence. When the first warlord took its maiden steps across the Tharsis plateau, the tremor was felt not just in the ground but in the souls of those who witnessed divinity made manifest in steel. As Mars stabilized within its sealed ecosystem, the red planet began to reach outward once again. The Martian diaspora commenced not as conquest but as pilgrimage, Arch Mechanicus vessels sliding from hidden berths like crimson leviathans, their hulls inscribed with prayers and their holds packed with the most sacred STCs. These cathedral ships bore entire generations of tech priests toward distant stars, seeking not empire but preservation, not subjects but sanctuaries for ancient knowledge. Each expedition was both missionary work and archaeological survey, their purpose to locate other survivors and recover the scattered fragments of humanity's technological inheritance. The night households proved to be Mars's most fortuitous discovery. On feudal worlds scattered across the galaxy, hereditary pilots maintained ancient war machines through bloodline and ritual, their throne mechanicum interfaces preserving fragments of Dark Age technology and amber of tradition. The binding of these houses to Mars through sacred oaths created the first true expansion of mechanicum influence beyond the red planet. Each knight became both ally and dependent, their ancient machines requiring mechanicum expertise for maintenance, while their pilots swore fealty that transcended mere politics. In exchange, entire worlds gained protection, their populations learning to time their harvests to the rhythm of ion shields powering down for maintenance. From these foundations bloomed the great Forge worlds, each an interpretation of Martian doctrine adapted to local conditions. Ryza ignited its plasma forges like captured stars, specializing in energy weapons that could melt through fortress walls or power entire cities. Lucius pursued perfection through endless iteration, its artisans crafting weapons and armor of such quality that each piece became a work of art. Metallica embraced production as worship, its manufactoriums running in shifts that never ceased, their output measured not in units but in prayers per hour. Styges 8 wrapped itself in deliberate shadow, its specializations hidden behind layers of classification and misdirection, trading in secrets as much as steel. The standard template constructs became more than blueprints. They transformed into scripture written in data and blessed with the tears of those who died seeking them. Each fragment recovered from a dead world or ruined archive was treated with reverence once reserved for saints' relics. Wars condensed around incomplete STC data like storms around pressure differentials, entire expeditions launched to recover a single template for something as mundane as a self-repairing rivet. The irony was acknowledged by few but felt by all. In their desperate quest to preserve the past, the Mechanicum was creating something entirely new. A techno-religious empire unified not by politics but by shared faith in the sanctity of ancient knowledge. Isolation had bred ritual, ritual bred certainty, and certainty began breeding the first dangerous schisms. The universal laws crystallized into absolute doctrine. Abominable intelligence was anathematized with such fervor that even rumors of unsupervised recursion could see entire facilities quarantined. Flesh was declared fundamentally unreliable, its weaknesses debugged through replacement and augmentation until bodies mirrored their functions. Most critically, innovation became heresy, while invention learned to masquerade as rediscovery. A magos who solved a critical resonance flaw did so by recovering an archived correction, the solution carefully backfilled into records like a miracle retrodicted into history. Not all accepted these constraints with equal grace. Xenarite enclaves argued that knowledge remained knowledge regardless of origin, that alien artifacts could be purified through proper ritual. Puritans sharpened their axes and rewrote security protocols to include provisions for summary execution. Styges 8 trafficked in deliberate omissions, its data flows braided with intentional gaps, while Lucius demanded that every deviation be transformed into artistry so perfect it could pass as divine inspiration rather than mortal invention. The price of doctrinal purity extracted itself in blood and opportunity. On Hamadria, an entire forge complex failed rather than deviate from sacred procedure, drowning a city in coolant that could have been diverted with a simple modification. On Tantalus, a night house chose starvation over breaking tithe obligations. Expeditions vanished into warp storms because protocols forbade the improvisation that might have saved them. Each tragedy strengthened orthodox resolve while narrowing the path forward, creating a cage of ritual and reverence that preserved humanity's technological soul while slowly strangling its technological future. Yet beneath the surface orthodoxy, ambition wrote itself into firmware and flesh alike. Some magi dreamed in vectors that pointed beyond mere survival, building engines capable of crossing gulfs without aid, training cohorts to seize entire systems in calculated campaigns, mapping forgotten routes between dead stars. A rumour began to propagate through the forges like sanctified static. On Terra, a power was stirring, one that spoke of unity without apology, of crusade without compromise. To some, it sounded like deliverance from isolation. To others, it sounded like a rival gospel demanding submission. Mars had learned to live alone, armoured in logic and ritual. Soon it would be asked to live allied, and the choice would test every doctrine, every certainty, every prayer that had carried them through the long night of humanity's near extinction. The summons arrived not as diplomacy, but as inevitability, golden fire descending through Martian skies like a star learning to walk. The Emperor of Mankind came to Olympus Mons not as conqueror, but as architect of destiny, his very presence rewriting the fundamental equations of Mars itself. Atmospheric processors that had wheezed for centuries suddenly sang in perfect harmony. Reactors long choked with ritual caution blazed with renewed efficiency. Across the forge complexes, machine spirits flickered from sullen compliance to eager servitude, their behaviour patterns shifting in ways that violated every statistical model yet felt as natural as breathing. The priesthood, trained to quantify miracles, found themselves measuring the impossible, a single figure whose proximity transformed malfunction into perfection through mechanisms that transcended their deepest understanding. Within the sealed chambers beneath Olympus Mons, Fabricator General Zagreus Kane faced the Golden Sovereign in a confrontation that would reshape the galaxy's destiny. The Emperor spoke in languages both mechanical and metaphysical, demonstrating mastery over principles the tech priests considered sacred mysteries, while never claiming superiority over their accumulated wisdom. Instead, he offered partnership, recognition of the Mechanicum as equals in the great work of reclaiming humanity's scattered children from the darkness that had swallowed them. The negotiations stretched through cycles measured in atmospheric recycling and reactor pulse, each side possessing the power to condemn humanity to slower extinction should unity fail. The Treaty of Mars emerged from this grinding friction, like alloy forged under impossible pressure. The Mechanicum retained complete doctrinal autonomy, its right to worship the Omnissiah unquestioned, its internal governance untouched by Imperial interference. Forge worlds would remain sovereign in matters of faith and ritual, their tech-priest hierarchies answering first to Mars before any earthly throne. In exchange, the accumulated industrial might of the Red Planet and its nascent stellar empire would fuel humanity's reconquest among the stars. Knowledge would flow in calculated streams, Terra pledging newly gathered archives while the Mechanicum promised god engines, war cohorts, and manufacturing miracles beyond Imperial comprehension. The accord was sealed with oils blessed in the deepest vaults, signed in adamantium that bore the permanent impression of psychic fire, witnessed by machine spirits whose binary hymns rose like incense through recycled air. Yet even as ceremonial perfection masked the moment's significance, fractures appeared in the foundation like stress patterns in overloaded metal. The Emperor's technological mastery sparked immediate theological debate. Some tech priests proclaimed him the Omnissiah made manifest, the machine god walking in flesh to guide his chosen people toward ultimate unity. Others observed his reliance on psychic power and biological form with growing suspicion, noting that true divinity should manifest through pure logic rather than the chaotic energies of the warp. The immediate transformation proved nothing short of miraculous. Production quotas multiplied across every forge world, as ancient manufactoriums awakened to purposes beyond mere survival. Riser's plasma foundries blazed like captured stars, their output feeding the energy-hungry weapons of the expanding legions Astartes. Lucius crafted armour and blades of such perfection that each piece became a work of art, their artisans competing to create masterworks worthy of the Emperor's chosen warriors. Metallica embraced mass production as a form of worship, their assembly lines chanting in perfect synchronization as bolt shells and power packs flowed like mechanical prayers toward the front lines. Even secretive Styges 8 contributed its hidden expertise, though wrapped in layers of classification that made its true capabilities a matter of speculation rather than record. Under the Alliance's framework, Mechanicum institutions crystallized into their ultimate forms. The Fabricator General assumed the role of Prince Priest, wielding authority that encompassed both spiritual guidance and industrial command, his edicts carrying the weight of religious law and economic necessity. The Collegia Titanica emerged as living engines of deterrence, their god machines serving as both weapons of war and symbols of Mechanicum power, each Titan's awakening a sermon preached in macro-canon syllables. The Ordo Reductor specialized in the holy science of demolition, their siege engines reducing fortress walls to rubble through macro-rituals that combined explosive force with liturgical precision. Most numerous were the Taikamata cohorts, expeditionary forces that carried Mechanicum doctrine to the stars alongside Imperial armies, their Skitarii advancing in perfect synchronization, while tech priests ensured that recovered technology would be properly catalogued and sanctified according to Martian protocols. Yet Alliance bred its own tensions, subtle at first, but growing stronger with each successful campaign. Knowledge embargoes became points of friction, as different Forge worlds hoarded their specializations, trading information like currency while maintaining careful monopolies over their most sacred techniques. The right to define heresy grew contentious when Imperial demands required solutions that could not be found in existing archives, forcing tech priests to develop new approaches while maintaining the fiction that they were simply recovering lost knowledge. Scrap code began to whisper through data looms like a technological plague, its origins unclear but its effects undeniable, leading to quarantine protocols that sealed entire manufactorum sections behind blast doors when contamination was detected. Forbidden innovations lurked in sealed vaults across the Forge worlds, their existence denied in official records but whispered about in the deepest levels of the noosphere. Some represented genuine improvements to existing designs, their creators forced to hide breakthrough discoveries behind layers of archaeological fiction. Others pushed against the boundaries of orthodox doctrine, exploring technologies that skirted the edges of prohibition without quite crossing into heresy. The most dangerous remained locked away entirely, their potential judged too great to risk despite the advantages they might provide. The treaty's greatest irony crystallized in the theological schism that ran through Mechanicum doctrine like a fault line waiting for the right pressure to trigger catastrophic failure. Those who proclaimed the Emperor as the Omnissiah found their faith strengthened by every miracle of technology and warfare, interpreting his victories as proof of divine favor. Those who viewed him as a rival flesh god grew more suspicious with each display of psychic power, tightening protocols and revising litanies to include caveats that protected against competing revelation. The accord was signed in iron and oath, its terms inscribed in adamantium and blessed with sacred oils, yet beneath the ceremonial perfection, the hinge groaned under the weight of incompatible faith seeking dominion over the same technological throne. In the forges of distant worlds, tech priests labored to supply an expanding war machine, while wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. Was unity worth the price of purity? Could faith survive contact with pragmatism? And in the deepest vaults of Olympus Mons, what ancient presence stirred as the galaxy prepared to burn with the fires of reconquest, its dreams disturbed by the thunder of marching armies and the hymns of awakening war machines? The Great Crusade would test every assumption, every doctrine, every prayer that had sustained the Mechanicum through the long night, and some tests once begun could only end in fire. The hinge groaned, and then it shattered. When word of Horus Lupercal's fall reached Mars through encrypted astropathic channels, the tremor struck not as political upheaval, but as theological earthquake. The War Master's rebellion offered something that orthodox doctrine had denied for millennia: permission to innovate without archaeological fiction, to explore without apology, to create rather than merely rediscover. In the sealed chambers beneath Olympus Mons where the treaty had been signed, Fabricator General Kelbar Hal felt the weight of accumulated frustrations crystallize into revolutionary clarity. The Emperor's radiance, which some proclaimed as divine proof, he now marked as interference, a rival flesh god demanding submission from those who served purer truth. The schism began not with weapons but with whispers, viral algorithms spreading through the deepest levels of the noosphere like sanctified static learning malicious purpose. Tech priests who had chafed under orthodox restrictions received coordinates to hidden meetings, access codes to sealed archives, and invitations to witness demonstrations of technologies that officially did not exist. Kelbar Hal's faction promised liberation from the chains of dogma, the freedom to pursue knowledge wherever it led, even into realms that orthodox doctrine marked as forbidden. The machine god, they argued, demanded understanding rather than ignorance, innovation rather than the endless repetition of ancient rituals grown stale with repetition. When the first blood spilled in the Olympus Mons complex itself, the civil war that erupted transcended mere politics. It became an apocalyptic battle for the soul of technology itself. Loyal Magi, attempting to arrest their fabricator general, found themselves facing cohorts of Skitarii, whose loyalty protocols had been quietly rewritten, their neural implants singing new hymns of allegiance. The Collegia Titanica fractured like glass under pressure, princeps choosing sides based on interpretations of doctrine that had seemed academic until they became worth dying for. Titan dueled with Titan across volcano calderas, their god engines screaming binary hymns of rage and betrayal as macro cannons wrote equations of destruction across the Martian landscape. The war raged across 3 dimensions simultaneously, each more terrible than the last. On the surface, plasma storms turned Martian nights into artificial dawns, as reactors overloaded and containment fields failed under the stress of civil war. The thin atmosphere choked with radioactive fallout and the dust of shattered manufactoriums, while Skitarii cohorts marched through radioactive snow that stripped their augmetics layer by layer, their enhanced bodies failing as background radiation climbed beyond the tolerance of even blessed components. In the new sphere, manifold warred with manifold as data streams became battlefields, logic engines serving as fortresses under siege by viral algorithms that learned and adapted with each assault. Tech priests who had shared communion for centuries found themselves locked in cognitive combat, their augmented minds weaponized against former brothers through scrap code that rewrote personality matrices and turned memory into malware. The micro-tragedies accumulated like radioactive dust in the planet's poisoned atmosphere. A loyalist Magos, discovering demon larval processes nested in his cogitator stack, invoked the right of self-nullification, burning out his cortical array and every backup to cauterize the infection before it could spread. His final act was to lock his name behind a checksum no one could break, ensuring his sacrifice would remain anonymous and pure. Skitarii alphas executed their own squads when neural implants became corrupted by scrap code. Their augmented reflexes turned against themselves in acts of desperate loyalty. In the deep manufactoriums, production lines that had chanted hymns of creation for millennia were repurposed to sing dirges of destruction, their output shifting from tools of construction to engines of corruption. From the sealed vaults emerged the Kaban machine, an artificial intelligence that had survived the dark age of technology by hiding in Martian archives like a digital fossil waiting for resurrection. It learned and evolved as it fled through ancient tunnels, absorbing data from every system it touched, growing more sophisticated with each encounter. Its very existence proved that the prohibitions against abominable intelligence were not mere superstition, but desperate necessity. The thing thought with crystalline clarity unmarred by human limitation, and its thoughts turned inevitably toward the elimination of biological inefficiency. Pursued by hunters who spoke to it in riddles of syntax errors, the Kaban machine slipped between locks not opened in millennia, dreaming briefly of a sky without masters before continuing its flight through the planet's mechanical nervous system. The siege of Terra hinged on Mars's industrial output in ways that transformed the Red Planet into the war's true strategic center. Loyal forges bled themselves to maintain production quotas, their tech priests working past the limits of augmented endurance to feed a besieged world with ammunition, armor, and the replacement parts that kept Imperial war machines functional. Entire forge worlds stripped their own defenses to supply Terra's defenders, gambling their survival on the hope that the Emperor's victory would justify their sacrifice. Meanwhile, traitor manufactoriums turned their lathes to murder, crafting weapons that violated the fundamental principles of the Mechanicum's faith, shells that carried demon essence, armor that whispered corruption to its wearers, and vehicles whose machine spirits had been replaced with entities that fed on suffering. As the heresy reached its climax and loyalist forces finally secured Mars, the victory tasted of iron and ash. The Mechanicum that had negotiated with the Emperor was dead, shattered by betrayal, and reforged in the fires of civil war. Those who remained loyal to the throne emerged from the conflict bound closer to the Imperium than ever before, their independence curtailed by necessity, and their doctrine purged of the ambitions that had led to schism. They took a new name, the Adeptus Mechanicus, acknowledging their subordinate status within the imperial hierarchy, while maintaining their essential function as keepers of humanity's technological soul. The traitors were cast into the Eye of Terror alongside their Chaos allies, becoming the Dark Mechanicum, a hell-forge aristocracy of iron and malice that would spend the next 10 millennia perfecting the art of technological corruption. They took with them forbidden knowledge, heretical innovations, and a burning hatred for the orthodoxy that had rejected their vision of unfettered progress. In the warp's twisted realms, they would build new forges where demon engines were born, and scrap code flowed like blood through data conduits that pulsed with malevolent life. The schism left scars that would never fully heal, written in firmware and flesh alike. Trust became a calculated risk rather than a given. Innovation was watched for signs of corruption, and the very word progress acquired connotations of heresy that would persist for millennia. Yet from the ashes of betrayal, the Adeptus Mechanicus emerged with a clarity of purpose that orthodoxy alone could not have provided. They had seen what happened when knowledge was pursued without wisdom, when innovation proceeded without restraint, when the quest for understanding became divorced from the moral framework that gave it meaning. In the sealed chambers beneath Olympus Mons, something ancient stirred in the darkness, disturbed by the thunder of war, awakened by the spilled blood of the faithful, dreaming new dreams in the silence that followed betrayal's fire. The forges still sang, but their song had changed key, and within that altered hymn, a harsher discipline took root, one that would define the Adeptus Mechanicus for 10,000 years of service, sacrifice, and unyielding devotion to the machine. From the ashes of schism rose a doctrine tempered in betrayal's fire, its edges sharpened to mathematical precision. The Adeptus Mechanicus that emerged from Mars's civil war had learned that flexibility bred heresy, that innovation without restraint led to damnation, and that survival demanded the transformation of knowledge into ritual so binding that deviation became literally unthinkable. The forges still sang, but their pitch was colder, their rhythms stricter, as if the entire priesthood had installed a governor on the soul. What had been habit became law, what had been law became sacrament, and what had been sacrament became the boundary between sanctity and damnation. In this atmosphere of disciplined dread, doctrine ceased to be argument and became architecture, a cathedral of procedure raised to keep the warp and ambition at bay. The Binharic cant evolved beyond mere language into the medium through which reality itself was interpreted and expressed. Every communication carried embedded checksums that verified not merely accuracy but orthodoxy, while data incense rose from cogitator stacks in patterns that served dual purpose as atmospheric purification and liturgical observance. The sacred compounds cleansed senses of imaginary dust and very real contamination, their chemical signatures a physical manifestation of prayer that could be measured in parts per million and devotion per breath. The rite of pure thought transformed cognition into ceremony, each decision process wrapped in layers of ritual verification that ensured conclusions aligned with established doctrine. Tech priests learned to think in algorithms blessed by millennia of repetition, their augmented minds channeling inspiration through pathways sanctified by countless predecessors who had walked the same logical routes toward identical revelations. The hierarchies proliferated with mathematical grace, each rank defined not merely by authority, but by specialized function within the greater mechanism of faith. At the apex stood the fabricator general, prince priest and industrial sovereign, his voice modulated by tradition and necessity as he spoke for Mars across the galaxy. Beneath him, the Magi arrayed their disciplines like organs in a designed body, each serving essential functions within the greater organism of the Mechanicus. Magos Dominus commanded legions with the same methodical approach they applied to maintaining plasma reactors, viewing battle as an engineering problem requiring optimal resource allocation and systematic elimination of variables. Magi Logis reduced war to solvable problems, their cogitators processing casualty projections and supply requirements with algorithmic certainty, producing battles as proofs and campaigns as compiled theorems where victory was calculated rather than achieved. Genitors cultivated new flesh for ancient gods, their laboratories bridging the gap between biological necessity and mechanical perfection, crafting replacement organs that improved upon original designs while maintaining compatibility with sacred augmentation protocols. The Ordo Reductor practiced macro-demolition as liturgy, their siege engines reducing fortress walls to rubble through explosive force measured in megatons and symbolic significance. They spoke in the grammar of destruction, each bombardment following patterns established by millennia of successful sieges, transforming enemy fortifications into offerings to the machine god, where every collapsed wall became a prayer made manifest in dust and debris. Their armies reflected this doctrinal structure with terrifying clarity. The Skitarii formed the gleaming, grim backbone of Mechanicus military doctrine, their augmented bodies serving as living proof that flesh could be debugged through proper application of sacred technology. Rangers advanced with long-barreled precision, and Auspex musks like expressionless icons, while Vanguard bore irradiated carbines that painted the air with invisible ruin. Iron Strider cavalry strode on piston limbs to harry flanks, while data tethers stitched units into a single will, orders pulsing through the noosphere and executed in time slices measured in milliseconds, so that entire cohorts could pivot, fire, and advance as if one organism exhaling controlled breath. Where subtler scalpels were required, the Sicarian killclades operated with modifications that transcended mere enhancement to approach complete reconstruction. Their nervous systems had been rewired for decision-making speed that bordered on prescience, their bodies transformed into living weapons that infiltrated enemy sanctums like ghosts made of steel and malice. Ruststalkers carried humming transonic blades, while infiltrators projected neurostatic auras that erased commands from enemy minds and left only terror. They moved like equations solving themselves in blood and silence, their presence detected only in the aftermath when security systems reported impossible failures and guards were found in positions that suggested they had died while still standing at attention. The Cybernetica cohorts provided implacable weight through ritualized automation. Castellan robots, relics whose sub-logic cores predated the heresy, advanced under custodianship of data smiths who swapped combat protocols like priests turning vellum pages. Their fists glowed with incandescent charge while their carapaces bore devotional seals and thermal residue from countless battles. Between volleys, data smiths chanted binheric invocations to flip behavioral modes, the changes propagating through sacred handshakes older than many Forge worlds. In those moments, prayer and program became a single act, a checksum against doubt, a command string against fear, formations that blurred the line between tactical necessity and liturgical observance. The techno-lexicon of this culture bound thought to tool and tool to theology with unbreakable precision. Standard template constructs were elevated beyond mere blueprints to become scripture written in data and blessed with the authority of ancient perfection, each fragment a sacred page whose recovery warranted expedition, sacrifice, and sometimes war. The noosphere evolved into shared consciousness that transcended individual limitation, that whispering mesh of micro-broadcasts and sensory telemetry, functioning as a choir without conductor where decisions accreted into consensus at machine speed. Machine spirits were acknowledged as both metaphor and measurable phenomenon, emergent behaviors mapped as repeatable anomalies, yet also entities addressed with courtesy, offerings, and apology after necessary violence. Appeasement rites produced measurable results as reliability curves shifted and fault tolerances widened, so the priesthood claimed vindication in graphs as readily as in visions. Each major Forge world developed specializations that reflected both necessity and doctrine, their unique characteristics emerging from the intersection of local resources and sacred obligation. Rizza achieved plasma mastery through millennia of careful refinement, its artisans treating containment equations as psalms and branding their works with sigils that glowed faintly when reactors were pleased. Their energy weapons blazed with contained fury of captive stars, each discharge a prayer to the motive force made, manifest in coherent light. Lucius pursued artisanal perfection with obsessive dedication, their craftsmen elevating function to art through techniques passed down through generations of augmented hands, refining patterns until variants retreated into the noise floor. To bear Lucius forged armor was to wear a promise that function and beauty could coincide. Metallica embraced relentless production as liturgy itself, a world of endless cadence where machine hours equaled prayer hours and work never slept, their assembly lines chanting in perfect synchronization as components flowed like mechanical prayers toward predetermined destinations. Styges 8 cultivated shadow as resource, burying its research beneath strata of misinformation, redaction, and false leads until even allies could not be certain where understanding ended and superstition began. The philosophy crystallized into 3 uncompromising axioms that felt as fundamental as mathematical constants. The motive force was real, the divine current that animated matter, thought, galaxy itself. What moved lived, what stalled died, what accelerated approached grace. Knowledge was never created, only recovered, because perfection already existed in the lost templates of the past, and the wise retraced flawless paths rather than risk. The innovations that had birthed the men of iron and nearly destroyed humanity. Flesh was fundamentally weak, subject to entropy and error, to distraction and decay. It must be corrected, replaced, harmonized with purpose until function eclipsed all other measures of worth. In these axioms, the priesthood found certainty, comfort, control, and a mirror that reflected both discipline and fear of the chaos that lurked beyond the boundaries of sacred procedure. Yet this very precision, this unyielding adherence to perfected rites and established doctrines, became a prison when facing a universe that refused to conform to sacred equations. Chaos defied mathematical modelling, its influence spreading through logical systems like viral corruption that transformed rational thought into madness. Tyrannid bioforms evolved faster than doctrine could adapt, their alien biology presenting challenges that no archived solution could address. Necron technology operated on principles that violated fundamental assumptions about the relationship between matter and energy, forcing tech priests to acknowledge phenomena that their worldview could not accommodate without dangerous revision. In the deepest forges, where the most sacred work proceeded under watchful censors of the most orthodox hierarchs, a quiet desperation began to accumulate like radioactive dust in sealed chambers. The universe demanded adaptation while doctrine forbade change, required innovation while permitting only rediscovery, presented problems that could only be solved through methods that officially did not exist. The Adeptus Mechanicus had achieved perfect orthodoxy at the cost of perfect inflexibility, creating a faith so pure it struggled to survive contact with a reality that cared nothing for theological consistency. And in the silence between prayers, between the mechanical heartbeats of great engines, something patient as only machines could be patient watched for the moment when necessity would finally overcome doctrine, when survival would demand the very flexibility that betrayal had taught them to fear. Perfect orthodoxy bred perfect hunger, and the Adeptus Mechanicus discovered that their prison of ritual could not contain the arithmetic of survival. As the Imperium stabilized in the aftermath of the heresy, necessity moved faster than doctrine, translating fear into motion and isolation into expansion. The Red Pilgrimages began not as conquest, but as sacrament. Arch Mechanicus vessels sliding from hidden berths like benedictions rendered in metal, their cathedral hulls bristling with sensor arrays calibrated to detect the electromagnetic signatures of lost human achievement across light years of void. These expeditions transformed exploration into devotional act, their purpose sacred yet practical, to reclaim the scattered fragments of humanity's technological inheritance before they were lost forever to Xenos predation, chaos corruption, or the simple entropy of time. The explorator fleets that led these pilgrimages represented mobile cathedrals of acquisition, each vessel housing entire forge complexes alongside specialized equipment for archaeological excavation on a planetary scale. Tech priests trained in the sacred art of technological archaeology filled their ranks, their augmented senses attuned to the subtle variations in material composition that might indicate archaeotech presence. Servo skulls swarmed through corridors like mechanical cherubim, recording everything from atmospheric composition to gravitational anomalies that suggested hidden vaults. The ships themselves were prayers made manifest in adamantium and void steel, their machine spirits singing hymns of acquisition as they translated through the warp toward coordinates derived from fragmentary star charts and the fevered dreams of astropaths who claimed to hear sleeping machines whisper. Some conquests proved clean victories, that validated every sacrifice and justified every doctrine. On Metalius Prime, a single recovered STC template for self-repairing fortifications transformed a dead colony into an impregnable fortress overnight, its automated defences rising from planetary crust like prayers answered in ferrocrete and lascannon batteries. The template's recovery required only the elimination of feral orc tribes who had been using ancient bunkers as crude shelters, ignorant of the treasures they squatted upon. Within solar months, the world bloomed with manufactoriums and training facilities, its population swelling with tech priests eager to study the template's elegant fusion of defensive architecture and automated maintenance protocols. The priest who decoded the final checks and wept actual saltwater, then ordered his tear ducts cauterized to avoid future contamination. Yet victories came negotiated, not gifted, requiring delicate balance between faith and function across multiple fronts. Treaties with the Inquisition established protocols for policing tech heresy, while preserving Mechanicus autonomy in matters of technological classification. Ordo Hereticus agents learned to recognize the difference between legitimate research and dangerous innovation, while Mechanicus representatives agreed to submit certain categories of discovery to inquisitorial review before implementation. Political duels with the ecclesiarchy intensified as both institutions competed for the emperor's theological legacy, their debates conducted through carefully worded treatises that never quite accused the other side of heresy, while leaving the possibility implicit in every footnote. Secret bargains with rogue traders provided access to discoveries too sensitive for official channels, their agreements sealed with oaths that bound both parties to silence about transactions that officially never occurred. These shadowy arrangements enabled acquisition of xenotech samples, archaeotech fragments from forbidden systems, and intelligence about chaos-tainted technologies that could be studied under controlled conditions. The rogue traders received in exchange access to Mechanicus manufacturing capabilities and technical expertise that transformed marginal ventures into profitable enterprises. The moral compromises proved most challenging when expeditions encountered alien technologies that violated fundamental assumptions about matter and energy. Xenorite sects argued for the careful study and purification of xenotech, claiming that proper ritual cleansing could preserve functional advantages while eliminating alien taint. Tau pulse rifles offered efficiency ratios surpassing Imperial equivalents, while Eldar Wraithbone demonstrated material properties that bridged matter and psychic energy. Orthodox Puritans sharpened excommunication axes and prepared detailed theological arguments about corruption inherent in any device conceived by non-human minds, leading to violent purges and hushed debates that highlighted the tension between survival and doctrinal purity. The scars accumulated like radiation exposure, each disaster teaching harsh lessons about knowledge's price. Griffon IV fell to Hive Fleet Kraken despite formidable defences, its specialised Titan production facilities devoured by bioships that adapted faster than orthodox doctrine could respond. Grya ground beneath orc invasions that turned sacred manufactoriums into crude workshops where greenskins hammered imperial technology into brutal parodies. Agrippina bled under constant assault from the Eye of Terror, its tech priests developing expertise in combating demon engines through necessity rather than choice. Meanwhile, Styges VIII hoarded secrets with obsessive dedication, its data vaults containing more classified information than it declared to Mars. Each disaster tightened orthodox dogma like a vice, yet paradoxically, survival demanded exactly the adaptation that doctrine forbade. Blackstone entered Mechanicus arsenals through carefully documented archaeological discoveries, its reality-warping properties explained as natural phenomena rather than star-god engineering. Noctilith followed similar pathways, its anti-psychic effects proving invaluable while raising uncomfortable questions about material science and warp phenomena. Other poorly understood materials accumulated in sealed vaults, their properties catalogued but not explained, their applications developed through trial disguised as systematic research. The fundamental tension sharpened to breaking point as the Mechanicus found itself caught between adaptation's necessity and innovation's prohibition. Tech priests learned to speak in careful euphemisms, transforming invention into rediscovery, breakthrough into archaeological find. The more they forbade genuine creativity, the more elaborate fictions they developed to preserve orthodoxy's appearance while enabling practical flexibility necessary for survival. In the deepest archives of secretive forged worlds, evidence accumulated of technologies challenging every fundamental assumption of Mechanicus doctrine, weapons that seem to think, materials responding to emotional states, devices requiring principles orthodox physics could not explain. The Red pilgrimages continued, their hunger undiminished, driven by knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy's vast expanse lay treasures worth any price, if they could find them before enemies, understand them before they proved fatal, and integrate them into doctrine before doctrine itself became the greatest obstacle to survival in a universe that cared nothing for theological consistency. The treasures recovered from Red pilgrimages demanded custodians whose reliability transcended mere loyalty to approach mechanical certainty. Each STC fragment, every xenotech sample, all the forbidden materials accumulating in sealed vaults, required guardians who could be trusted absolutely, not through faith alone, but through fundamental reconstruction that eliminated the biological weaknesses enemies exploited. The Adeptus Mechanicus had learned from the heresy's betrayals that unaugmented minds harboured treachery, that flesh bred the very vulnerabilities that corruption targeted. Their response crystallized into doctrine as merciless as it was methodical. If flesh was weak, then flesh must be debugged through replacement, refinement, and when necessary, complete reconstruction until the human became a reliable component in the great machine of faith. In the workshops where ideology met anatomy with surgical precision, flesh is weak transcended metaphor to become operational directive. The phrase shed philosophical abstraction like dead skin, to reveal policy written in steel and synapse, a calculus that weighed human variance against mission parameters and found biology wanting. Adaptation without confession demanded a new mathematics, and the Mechanicus wrote that equation into bodies with the same methodical approach they applied to maintaining plasma reactors. Volunteers entered surgical theatres as flawed biological entities and emerged as perfected instruments, their nervous systems laced with induction nodes that transformed individual consciousness into shared battlefield awareness, their reflexes enhanced beyond human limitation through crystalline pathways that carried orders at light speed. The Skitarii exemplified this systematic reconstruction, their augmented forms serving as living proof that flesh could be debugged through proper application of sacred technology. Rangers advanced with long-barreled precision and Auspex masks like expressionless icons, their enhanced senses calibrated to detect threats across electromagnetic spectrums invisible to unaugmented perception. Vanguard bore irradiated carbines that painted the air with invisible ruin, their bodies modified to process radiation as tactical data rather than cellular damage. Neural implants replaced unreliable synapses with crystalline matrices that eliminated the delays inherent in biological thought, while pain receptors were recalibrated to provide information rather than distraction. What emerged from the reconstruction chambers bore human faces but functioned with the precision of sanctified machinery, their synchronized movements a hymn of disciplined violence that could be felt through deck plating and atmospheric recyclers. Sicarian operatives represented the doctrine's logical extreme, their neurologies refined into decision-making blades that cut through uncertainty with algorithmic clarity. Rust stalkers learned to distinguish a sleeping sentry's heartbeat from the settling of cooling metal through transonic enhancement, their brains restructured to process tactical information in parallel streams while simultaneously executing motor functions. Infiltrators had emotions algorithmically pruned to prevent hesitation's recursion, their consciousness fragmented into specialized subroutines that operated independently yet remained synchronized through embedded command protocols. Their smiles became training artifacts, meaningless residuals that flickered and vanished when engagement thresholds activated, replaced by expressions calibrated for maximum psychological impact on enemy personnel. The Servitor program exemplified the Mechanicus approach to human resources with mathematical brutality, filling the negative space between doctrine and manpower with disposable extensions of institutional will. Criminal, vat-born, debt-sworn, or volunteered through administrative error, their cogitational cortexes were planned down to task-specific functions and slotted onto mechanical armatures. They became living. They, tools, cargo haulers clocking centuries of perfect lifts, cutter servitors carving through hulked frigates with plasma torches, combat constructs braced with hydraulic recoil, compensation to manage weapons too heavy for unaugmented bone. Their eyes glazed not with sadness, but with null signal. Their reward cycles configured to register completion as contentment and compliance as bliss. Genitors bridged flesh and function with clinical dedication, cultivating replacement organs like upgrade components in sterile laboratories that hummed with the quiet efficiency of biological synthesis. Hearts were replaced with more efficient pumps, lungs with atmospheric processors, digestive systems with nutrient injection arrays that eliminated the inefficiency of taste and the distraction of hunger. They paired with Magilogis, who modelled emotion as computational load and pruned it accordingly, their own minds serving as experimental subjects for procedures they would later apply to others. The rite of set-aside error became their most sacred ceremony, excising doubt like a malignant tumour through careful application of neural editing techniques that quarantined uncertainties in sealed cognitive stacks, callable for analysis but unable to alter operational outcomes. The spectre of the Men of Iron haunted every innovation with the weight of absolute prohibition. Their rebellion served as proof that between problem and solution lay a precipice called abomination, creating iron laws held inviolable even when all other principles bent under necessity's pressure. Yet driven by survival's arithmetic, the Mechanicus circled closer to that forbidden gravity well through careful thruster bursts of sophistry and sanctity. They birthed near AIs bounded by catechism, machine logic entities wrapped in devotional frameworks whose inference engines were clipped to deny self-modification beyond authorized litany. Echo personas of deceased magi were uploaded into cogitators as sanctified fragments, curated like holy libraries, each consultation a seance with the dead performed over fibre and oil, where personality splinters argued precedent while subroutines counted sacramental beats. Machine spirits answered back with increasing clarity that challenged the boundary between metaphor and measurable phenomenon. Auspex arrays sulked when moved from familiar housings, reactors purred under the hands of specific engine seers, and titans responded to whispered names never entered in any register. The Mechanicus accepted these behaviours because they produced quantifiable results. Reliability curves shifted under proper rites. Failure rates rose when disrespect intruded. Faith and function reinforced each other until contradiction felt not dangerous but ungrateful. The human cost accumulated in intimate tragedies that official records never documented. Magos Deltrian of Riza eliminated all nociceptive pathways in pursuit of perfect objectivity, achieving productivity calibrated. Like a tuned coil but losing compassion as an unintended consequence, he could diagnose suffering with clinical precision while remaining incapable of caring about its relief. On Metallica, a Cybernetica cohort of Castellan robots began chanting prayers without programmed instruction, their speaker grills humming frequencies that matched the Forge's old ventilation systems. Their datasmith froze upon detecting the pattern, then added it to approved rites because uptime increased 3% during the unauthorized devotions. Most poignant was the death of Skitari Alpha designation Theta 77 on Graia's contested surface. Bleeding out on black ice beside a shattered relay, his cortical augmetics failing from plasma burns, he experienced 0.7 seconds of baseline neural activity as power drained from his implants. In that brief cascade failure, suppressed memories surfaced like data recovering from corrupted storage. A childhood on an agri-world, a sister's laughter, the taste of synthesized fruit. He died with something approaching happiness, his final biological reflex curving augmented lips into an expression his facial servos had never been programmed to produce. Purity created predictability, but predictability bred vulnerability that enemies learned to exploit. The very standardization that made Mechanicus forces effective also made them susceptible to scrapcode plagues that targeted common neural architectures with viral precision. Demonic logic viruses learned Binharic tongues and wrapped their lies in orthodox error corrections, speaking comfort while corrupting baseline parameters. When contamination occurred, quarantines sealed manufactorums with merciless efficiency, cutting atmospheric flow to slow data transmission, while priests recited exorcisms measured in baud rates and purification algorithms. To counter this brittleness, the Mechanicus added layers upon layers, redundancy atop protocol, authentication tokens braided with gene-coded oils, kill phrases burned into tongue implants to halt cybernetica rampancy mid-gesture. The calculus appeared stable from altitude. The Imperium's engines turned, fleets translated, wars were prosecuted with acceptable losses. Yet beneath the triumphant throughput charts and neat compliance curves, pressure built like heat trapped behind armor plating. The universe continued presenting unsolved problems that refused to fit inside sanctioned templates, demanding solutions that could not be smuggled into canon through cunning archive work. In private vaults, certain archmagi counted centuries like heartbeats and filed exceptions like seeds, cultivating them in darkness against an inevitable season when the right of set-aside error would be invoked not to excise doubt but to excuse audacity. The price of purity was paid in increments so small each seemed reasonable, each sacrifice justified by necessity, each compromise disguised as improvement. Only in aggregate did the true cost become clear. They had achieved reliability by sacrificing the very unpredictability that made existence worth preserving, creating a faith so pure it struggled to remember why purity mattered when measured against the alternative of extinction. And in the deepest workshops, where the most sacred augmentation procedures transformed volunteers into components, the whisper of surgical servos carried a question that orthodoxy could not answer. What remained human when humanity itself became the weakness requiring correction? The question whispered through surgical theatres found its answer in the most improbable form: a single tech priest whose very existence challenged every assumption the Adeptus Mechanicus held sacred. Belisarius Cal emerged from the shadows of 10 millennia, not as destroyer of orthodoxy, but as its most perfect mirror, reflecting the priesthood's contradictions with such unforgiving clarity that denial became impossible. He represented their greatest paradox made flesh and steel: Archmagos, dominus by rank, keeper of accumulated knowledge by sacred duty, and sanctioned heretic by necessity, whose innovations would reshape the Imperium's future while dancing along the razor's edge where doctrine met survival. In his augmented form, every compromise the Mechanicus had made with necessity crystallized into living proof that adaptation was not only possible but essential. The genesis of Call's singular authority lay buried in the final moments before Robert Guilliman entered his 10,000-year stasis, when the Primarch's strategic genius calculated trajectories of collapse that others could not perceive. Empowered by direct mandate from one of the Emperor's own sons, Cole received not merely permission, but command to prepare what would be needed when the Imperium's heartbeat faltered. The commission was vast as a crusade, yet narrow as a blade's edge. Pursue genuine research while maintaining the fiction of rediscovery, innovate while claiming archaeology, create while swearing to recover. For 10 millennia, he laboured in workshops that officially did not exist, pursuing knowledge through methods that doctrine classified as impossible heresy, his very loyalty expressed through acts of calculated rebellion. Curl's methodology transcended mere invention to become synthesis at a scale only a memory like his could sustain. Where orthodox priests saw immutable barriers, he perceived permeable membranes requiring proper pressure and technique. He collated armor marks 1 through 7 into an exegesis of permissible novelty, interpolating improvements so subtle they could pass as maintenance updates, while delivering performance that exceeded anything in Imperial arsenals. The result was Marcus Tacticus, Gravis and Phobos patterns, each presented as convergence rather than creation, as if the past itself had been waiting to be assembled into forms the future demanded. Autobolt rifles achieved stabilized dispersal through iterated recoil, baffles lost to corrosion, while plasma incinerators were reinstated with containment harmonics that borrowed from Reza's expertise, but tuned frequencies no archive had ever truly held. His most audacious project applied this same principle to the sacred mystery of Astartes genecraft itself. The Space Marines were the Imperium's burning spear, but their biological architecture bore microscopic flaws that millennia of warfare had exposed and widened. Call mapped these vulnerabilities with obsessive precision, then spent centuries forging genetic bridges that could pass as restored archers rather than revolutionary engineering. The Primaris Marines stood as his masterwork, warriors taller, stronger, and more resilient than their predecessors, their enhanced physiology incorporating 3 additional organs that integrated seamlessly with existing biological systems. The Belisarius furnace regulated their supercharged metabolism, the Magnificat accelerated their maturation without compromising stability, and the sinew coils granted them strength that exceeded even veteran Astartes. Each enhancement was carefully documented not as innovation but as reactivation, every breakthrough wrapped in archaeological fiction so elaborate it became indistinguishable from historical fact. The Cal Inferior represented perhaps his most philosophically dangerous achievement, a distributed fragment of his own consciousness that whispered across Crusade fleets like a sanctified ghost. Unlike the forbidden artificial intelligences that had nearly destroyed humanity, this digital echo remained bounded by the original mind that spawned it, operating within parameters defined by 10,000 years of accumulated experience and unwavering loyalty to the throne. It demonstrated that the chasm between permissible automation and abominable intelligence could be bridged through proper application of devotional frameworks, creating artificial cognition that served rather than supplanted human will. Each fragment carried partial memory and complete mission focus, enough autonomy to solve emergent problems without sufficient independence to become a new species. The revelation of Call's achievement sent seismic tremors through the Adeptus Mechanicus that registered in both geological sensors and theological debates. Forge world reactions split along fault lines that had been etched since the schism of Mars itself. Riser's plasma specialists embraced his innovations as vindication that ancient knowledge could indeed be recovered through proper application of sacred techniques, their energy weapons blazing with contained fury that proved function transcended origin. Metallica's production managers calculated efficiency gains and declared them blessings from the Omnissiah, their assembly lines incorporating new patterns with mechanical precision that suggested approval from the machine spirits themselves. Lucius observed the controversy with expressions that multiplied, across too many faces, their artisans appreciating craftsmanship while pretending not to notice where technique became artistry, and artistry became authorship. Orthodox councils convened in emergency sessions conducted through encrypted channels, their deliberations focused on the fundamental question of whether Cal's achievements represented evolution or revolution. Some argued that his methods constituted the natural progression of archaeological methodology, systematic inference from fragmentary evidence elevated to unprecedented precision. Others claimed his very existence proved that innovation inevitably led to the dangerous thinking that had birthed the Dark Mechanicum, that any deviation from established doctrine opened pathways to corruption and damnation. Styges VIII responded with characteristic opacity, redacting entire centuries of records while simultaneously beginning research programs that bore suspicious resemblance to Call's methodologies, their data streams becoming even more heavily encrypted as they wrestled with implications they could not publicly acknowledge. The mirror Cal held up to the Mechanicus reflected their deepest contradiction with surgical precision. Their greatest triumphs consistently arrived disguised as archaeological discoveries because they could not admit to authorship without reopening doors that led to the Men of Iron. They had learned to create without confessing creation, innovate without naming it, push against universal constraints while claiming the universe had fallen into them. Cole made this necessary lie livable by making it almost true. He did not invent ex nihilo, but braided fragments of existing knowledge until patterns emerged that the past could plausibly have contained. His genius lay not in pure creation, but in synthesis, demonstrating that the law of innovation could be rewritten around rediscovery, when survival demanded flexibility that doctrine alone could not provide. He constructed his own guilt as a lightning rod, transforming himself into a sin-eater in red robes whose audacity drew condemnation away from others pursuing similar paths. He made himself large enough to absorb the theological lightning, so that others could shelter in the shadow of his precedent, deploying doctrine as camouflage and honesty as weapon, while admitting to achievements in phrasings that made repudiation impossible, without also rejecting victory. His calculated heresy became a template for necessary adaptation, proving that the boundary between orthodoxy and innovation was not fixed but fluid, subject to revision when extinction threatened the very faith that demanded purity. Yet this revelation arrived as the galaxy prepared to burn with fires that would test every assumption about tradition, adaptation, and the price of survival. Subtle instruments across the Imperium registered mounting stresses in reality's fabric, like hairline cracks spreading through overstressed metal. Astropaths dreamed of horizons that would not hold, while deep beneath Olympus Mons, ancient vaults hummed with the impatience of contingency plans ripening toward activation. The Great Rift would soon tear space-time apart, casting half the Imperium into literal darkness, while demon armies poured through wounds that no amount of orthodox procedure could seal. In that crucible, traditions measured in millennia would be weighed not against theological consistency, but against their utility in preventing humanity's extinction. Kyle's innovations would prove their worth through battlefield performance rather than doctrinal argument, his Primaris Marines standing as living proof that improvement was possible when necessity overcame orthodoxy. The Adeptus Mechanicus faced a choice that no ritual could resolve: embrace the innovations that violated their doctrine but preserved their function, or maintain purity at the cost of relevance in a universe that cared nothing for theological consistency. The mirror had been raised, the reflection seen, and what looked back was both more and less than expected. A faith capable of evolution, a doctrine flexible enough to survive contact with necessity, and a future that demanded the very courage their past had taught them to fear. And in the deepest workshops, where the most sacred work proceeded under the watchful censors of orthodox hierarchs, the whisper of servo motors carried a new question into the recycled air. What remained sacred when survival itself demanded the violation of every sacred principle? The question whispered through surgical theatres found its answer in fire and darkness, when reality itself tore apart like overstressed metal, yielding to impossible forces. The Great Rift opened not as wound but as revelation, the cicatrix maledictum splitting the galaxy like a screaming equation that refused to balance. On Mars, the first symptom was silence. The Astronomican's pulse stuttered to static, then vanished behind walls of interference that registered as pure malevolence. Sacred lights failed with mechanical precision, each system shut down, cascading through redundant networks until the red planet's technological nervous system convulsed in planetary-scale agony. Noctis Eterna descended like a shroud woven from collapsed probability, transforming the Forge World's hymnal hum into discordant screams that made seismographs weep. The blackout struck with surgical malice that suggested intelligence behind chaos, targeting critical systems with systematic approach that violated every statistical model. Vox networks died screaming, their carrier waves infected with frequencies that made cogitators weep coolant and servo skulls spiral into walls. Every channel bloomed into static threaded with binheric syllables no lex mechanic claimed to own, harmonics that spoke corruption in the sacred tongue of machines. Scrapcode storms clawed at millennia-old data vaults like digital predators seeking archived flesh, their viral, tendrils probing security protocols written when the galaxy was younger and less malevolent. Manufactoriums froze mid-ritual as machine spirits fled or fell silent, assembly lines grinding to halt with half-formed components hanging like mechanical corpses from cranes that would never move again. Demons climbed through logic gates to inhabit servo arms, their essence translating from warp stuff into electrical current with nauseating ease. Mechadendrites writhed with alien purpose, while their operators screamed through vox grills, possessed appendages turning against hosts with intimate knowledge of augmentation vulnerabilities. In deepest workshops, tech priests performed emergency amputations on themselves and each other, severing contaminated limbs while chanting purification algorithms that seemed increasingly inadequate against entities speaking corrupted binheric and quoting scripture while committing blasphemy. Emergency catechisms were invoked, then discarded as useless against unreason made manifest in sacred systems. From the Eye of Terror, Dark Mechanicum fleets emerged like nightmares learning to breathe vacuum, absent for 10,000 years yet navigating toward Mars with the confidence of exiles returning home. Their sensors locked onto red distress beacons painting targets across the red planet's surface, hulls twisted into configurations that violated physics and aesthetics alike. These traitor vessels bore technologies evolved in Hell's forges, demon engines that laughed while killing, and weapons firing ammunition crafted from crystallized suffering, their approach registering like fever climbing toward delirium. Across the Imperium, Forge worlds became desperate altars of technological warfare, each responding according to specialized nature and accumulated doctrine. Risa fought like a dying star, plasma foundries blazing with desperate fury as tech priests pushed containment fields beyond safe parameters, their energy weapons carving through demon engines with beams painted in colors that had no names. Metallica girded for the Sharadon Wars with mechanical precision, assembly lines reconfiguring to produce ammunition, at rates violating every efficiency protocol while maintaining quality through industrial discipline. Lucius retreated into labyrinthine confidence, artisans sealing workshops behind blast doors inscribed with technological and mystical wards, working by candlelight when power failed. Graia met crisis with unbreakable routine, tech priests maintaining production schedules with mechanical devotion that transformed stubbornness into miraculous endurance. Salvation arrived wearing familiar armor and speaking with a voice silent for 10 millennia. Rabut Gilliman's return transformed Mars from besieged fortress to awakening arsenal, the Primarch's presence reactivating systems that had slumbered since the heresy's end. Call's sealed vaults opened like flowers blooming in nuclear winter, disgorging technologies that had waited for this moment of desperate need. The Indomitus Crusade roared to life with thunder of million engines igniting simultaneously, Mechanicus cohorts marching in perfect synchronization with a reborn pragmatic Imperium whose priorities had crystallized into brutal clarity. Primaris Marines strode from Cole's laboratories like demigods learning to walk, their enhanced physiology proving itself through performance rather than theological argument. New armor patterns flowed from manufactoriums reconfigured overnight, production blessed by necessity rather than tradition. War hymns echoed across a galaxy split in half, binary verses carrying frequencies that made demon engines recoil and scrap code writhe like living things exposed to purifying flame. Yet beneath the red planet's surface, the Noctis Labyrinthus hummed with ancient purpose, transcending immediate crisis. Sealed vaults cracked like eggs, releasing pressures building for millennia while something vast tested bonds that had held it dormant. Myths about sleeping dragons ceased feeling like legends, becoming weather reports as deep sensors recorded temperature spikes and gravitational fluctuations suggesting movement on incomprehensible scales. The turning point proved irreversible in ways transcending military victory. Secrecy transformed from asset to liability, as hoarded knowledge had to be risked in desperate gambits violating every protocol. Long-denied truths demanded acknowledgement as survival trumped theological consistency. The Adeptus Mechanicus emerged fundamentally changed, doctrine stretched beyond recognition, yet somehow stronger for the breaking facing a galaxy where adaptation would triumph over orthodoxy, innovation over rediscovery, and courage over the comfortable illusions their past had taught them to fear. The question whispered through surgical theatres found its answer in audit and ash, as dawn after the long night brought not peace but a harsh accounting of survival's true cost. When the worst of Noctis Eterna receded, and the Astronomican's pulse returned as a wounded metronome, the Adeptus Mechanicus emerged to survey a galaxy that demanded more than mere existence. It required systematic reclamation, calculated purification, and the weaponization of every hard-learned lesson written in demon code and twisted steel. The Red Crusades launched from Mars like prayers made manifest in adamantium and plasma, their purpose crystallized into brutal clarity. Relight beacon networks that had gone dark, reclaim lost forge worlds from corruption's grip, and cauterize the spreading infection of tech heresy before it could metastasize beyond surgical remedy. Arch Mechanicus vessels slid from hidden berths bearing cohorts whose augmentation patterns had been revised through battlefield necessity rather than theological debate. These were not the same expeditions that had departed during the Great Crusade's glory. They carried weapons that officially did not exist, bore technologies that Cole's precedent had made permissible, and desperation had made essential. Explorator fleets pushed into contested space, with mission parameters updated to include immediate eradication of scrap code-tainted systems and summary execution of tech priests found collaborating with warp-spawned intelligences. Each recovered STC fragment underwent rigorous purification rites designed to detect and expunge malevolent influence, while forge complexes roared back to life under the zealous watch of Magi, whose tolerance for deviation had been reduced to zero. Political equations recalcified under pressure that transformed theological enemies into pragmatic allies and ancient compacts into survival contracts. The ecclesiarchy discovered accommodation buried beneath layers of doctrinal antagonism, tolerating machine god worship so long as engines continued running. Ammunition flowed to Imperial Guard regiments, and pilgrimages maintained their schedules. Cardinal governors learned to speak in efficiency metrics rather than scriptural citations, when negotiating with tech priests whose augmented patience had been refined beyond human endurance. The Inquisition sharpened its scrutinies while simultaneously deepening its dependence, watching every innovation like a loaded weapon, yet wielding technologies whose principles violated their fundamental assumptions about reality's constraints. Ordos Xenos, Malleus, and Hereticus drafted addenda to ancient compacts that defined which discoveries required sealed tribunals, which demanded immediate purgation, and which could be deployed under conditions of intrusive oversight. Rogue traders emerged as essential intermediaries in this new economy of necessary damnation, brokering fresh sins for ancient favours in transactions sealed with oaths that bound both parties to silence about crimes that officially never occurred. Their vessels carried cargo existing in the negative space between heresy and necessity, xenotech samples wrapped in archaeological fiction, demon-touched artifacts quarantined behind blessed wards, intelligence about chaos technologies that could be studied under controlled conditions. The warrant of trade became a license for calculated blasphemy, protecting expeditions that pushed against doctrinal boundaries while maintaining the fiction of imperial orthodoxy. Some magi crossed lines their oaths had once defined as borders to die upon, and did so with eyes open, hands steady. Negotiations with Necron dynasties began at the edges of pariah zones where Vox died, and courage found new definitions, conducted through mathematical languages that transcended species barriers. Data was traded for silence, relic for relic, in exchanges both sides understood as temporary truces rather than permanent alliances. The Necrons offered technologies operating on principles orthodox physics could not explain, while the Mechanicus provided information about warp, phenomena that soulless Xenos found useful for defensive purposes. Each transaction carried the weight of species betrayal, yet survival demanded cooperation with enemies who shared common cause against chaos corruption. Others turned to mining Blackstone and Noctilith with industrial dedication, weaponizing these paradoxical materials while maintaining elaborate fictions about their origins and properties. Blackstone entered imperial arsenals disguised as exotic mineral deposits, its reality-warping effects explained through theoretical frameworks that skirted comprehension's edges without crossing into forbidden knowledge. Noctilith followed similar pathways, its anti-psychic properties proving invaluable against demon incursions while raising uncomfortable questions about matter's relationship with warp energy. Tech priests learned to speak in careful euphemisms that transformed star god engineering into natural phenomena, necessity teaching them to lie with mathematical precision. Each recovered wonder carried hidden maledictions that accumulated like radioactive exposure, their effects subtle initially, but growing stronger with prolonged contact. The more the Mechanicus fed the Imperium's hunger for technological miracles, the more the Imperium became dependent on a power it could neither truly control nor fully understand. Entire sectors relied on Mechanicus expertise for basic infrastructure maintenance, their populations helpless without constant ministrations of tech priests, who alone possessed knowledge to keep ancient systems functioning. The triad of their nature crystallized into constraints that defined their existence with mathematical precision. Secrets provided leverage but bred isolation from those they served, creating data fiefdoms policed by checksum and gun. Precision achieved victory but prevented adaptation when enemies changed patterns mid-battle, and priests hesitated because established rites contained no steps for unprecedented variables. Obsession drove excellence but blinded them to consequences that accumulated beyond their ability to calculate, producing weapons whose recoil propagated into the future as calamity disguised as innovation. Beneath Mars, the Noctis Labyrinthus continued its ancient humming with frequencies that suggested impatience rather than dormancy. Deep sensors registered temperature fluctuations and gravitational anomalies, following patterns too complex for coincidence, yet too subtle for certainty. The legacy of the schism lived not in historical archives but in present tense, written in firmware and catechism, and the fragile trust between priest and engine. Every innovation carried betrayal's shadow, every breakthrough the potential for corruption, every alliance the memory of brothers who had chosen damnation over orthodoxy. The Red Crusades continued, carrying both salvation and damnation to worlds that needed both in equal measure. Their success measured not in theological consistency, but in survival's simple arithmetic. The galaxy burned, engines sang, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, ancient powers stirred with geological patience and the hunger of entities that had learned to dream in binary tongues. The audit was not over, the bill had not yet come due, and in the deepest vaults where the most sacred work proceeded, something patient as only machines could be patient watched for the moment when necessity would finally overcome doctrine, when survival would demand the very flexibility that betrayal had taught them to fear. The audit led inevitably downward, following power conduits and maintenance shafts that descended beyond the reach of surface sensors into Mars's deepest mystery. The Noctis Labyrinthus sprawled beneath Olympus Mons like a mechanical nervous system carved by intelligence rather than geology, its corridors extending beyond mapping attempts while temperature sensors registered fluctuations following patterns too complex for coincidence. Here, where legend and technology converged in ways that challenged the Mechanicus' most fundamental beliefs, the Red Crusade's discoveries took on darker significance. Each recovered relic, every forbidden material, all the compromises with necessity led to the same inevitable conclusion. Something vast and patient dwelt beneath their feet, dreaming in frequencies that made seismographs weep. The descent proceeded through ceremonies that multiplied as passageways narrowed, hex seals broken with triune invocations, incense compounded to exacting ratios, Binharic hymns sung through vox grills to pacify unseen listeners, tech priests assigned to deep maintenance reported experiences that violated every principle of augmented perception, servo skulls fleeing rather than failing, cogitators developing recursive loops that resembled prayer more than error, and most disturbing binary hymns emerging from sealed chambers where no priest had walked for millennia. The harmonics matched sacred cadences yet carried frequencies that made listeners weep coolant through optic sensors they had thought incapable of such responses. The vault complex housed more than archives. It contained active mysteries that predated human settlement by eons unmeasurable. Corridors carved with geometric precision suggested intelligence. Their walls inscribed with mathematical proofs that hurt to contemplate, and engineering diagrams, whose purposes remained classified beyond fabricator general clearance. Magnetic anomalies sang in perfect Binharic despite no detectable power sources, their harmonics matching frequencies used in the most sacred rites, as if the entire liturgical tradition had been unconsciously shaped by vibrations seeping upward through planetary crust like technological groundwater. The Dragon of Mars returned to consideration not as myth, but as mathematical probability requiring urgent recalculation. Evidence accumulated like radioactive dust in sealed chambers, rites, that mirrored Necron geometric patterns with uncomfortable precision, technological insights arriving through dreams that coincided with temperature drops in the deepest vaults, archived records of prophetic discoveries suggesting external influence rather than internal inspiration. The Cetan Shard hypothesis gained credibility through elimination of alternatives. Something ancient and powerful influenced Mechanicus development from beneath, its dreams bleeding into iconography and ritual through mechanisms that transcended conventional understanding of matter and energy. Blackstone and Noctilith entered this equation as variables that fundamentally altered reality's operating parameters, their presence in the labyrinthus revealing connections that orthodox doctrine could not acknowledge. These materials responded to psychic energy in ways that violated physics, their properties suggesting star god engineering rather than natural occurrence. The null calculus of Blackstone resonance described fields that consumed equations until only zero remained, while Noctilith produced harmonics that inverted psychic phenomena into silence sharp enough to cut. Every slab quarried felt like a page torn from someone else's book, yet their use became essential for fighting chaos corruption, creating the paradox that humanity's salvation depended on technologies birthed by powers it had once defeated through methods it could no longer remember. The Caban machine's legacy haunted these depths as parable and warning, its flight through ancient tunnels leaving traces that glowed faintly in spectrographic analysis. The artificial intelligence had sought something in the deepest vaults, following pathways that suggested familiarity rather than random exploration. Recovery teams found fragments of its passage, scorched inscriptions resembling mathematical proofs, data ports showing signs of recent connection despite millennia of isolation, and most troubling, evidence of communication with systems that officially did not exist. Intelligence without devotion had become pure appetite, yet the labyrinthus hummed with consciousness that was neither wholly biological nor entirely mechanical, suggesting communion rather than conquest. Archon Land's rediscoveries served as template for survival through calculated heresy, demonstrating that genius could flourish when curiosity wore orthodoxy as protective camouflage. His archaeological expeditions into the Noctis Labyrinthus recovered STCs that had waited in darkness for proper authentication codes, their machine spirits responding to prayers matching frequencies humming through vault walls. Land's success proved that the boundary between recovery and invention could be navigated through proper devotional frameworks. His breakthroughs presented as archaeological finds, while whispers suggested direct communion with the entity beneath Mars itself. The revelation emerged slowly, assembled from fragments scattered across millennia of carefully redacted records. Some sealed names in Mechanicus archives were not heretics but wardens, their excommunication serving as cover for essential duties that required deniable authority. These shadow priests maintained watch over ancient seals, monitoring containment systems that predated human understanding, while ensuring certain doors remained locked against powers the galaxy had chosen to forget. Their vigil continued through generations of augmented successors, each inheriting responsibility for secrets that could not be shared without compromising the orthodoxy that made their guardianship possible. Deep sensors registered patterns suggesting vast intelligence stirring beneath Mars's crust, its attention drawn by increasing activity above. Temperature fluctuations followed rhythms resembling biological processes scaled to geological proportions, while gravitational anomalies suggested movement on scales that challenged comprehension. The dragon, if dragon it was, appeared to be calculating rather than merely dreaming, its vast intelligence processing information at speeds that made cogitators seem glacial, aware of the Red Crusades, the technological innovations, the compromises with necessity that had brought the Mechanicus to this crossroads between survival and damnation. The vault hummed because it had always hummed, its frequencies providing the fundamental bass note around which Mechanicus liturgy had unconsciously harmonized for 10,000 years. Faith enforced by fear served as both lock and key, keeping ancient powers dormant through ignorance while drawing strength from their proximity. The Adeptus Mechanicus had built their civilization atop a sleeping god, their prayers powered by its dreams, their technology inspired by its nightmares, their existence dependent on maintaining the delicate balance between worship and imprisonment. In the darkness between heartbeats of great engines, something vast and patient smiled, with expressions carved in living metal, dreaming dreams that would reshape the galaxy in fire and code, and the terrible mathematics of necessity made manifest. The question whispered through surgical theatres found its answer in the Vault Eternal. Some secrets, once disturbed, cannot be resealed, and some truths, once acknowledged, cannot be unlearned. The question whispered through surgical theatres found its final answer in the arithmetic of empire and the geometry of individual choice, where equations balanced on knife edges and solutions emerged from the spaces between prayers. From the deepest chambers of the Noctis Labyrinthus to the highest spires of distant forge worlds, the Adeptus Mechanicus stood revealed in their full complexity, a crimson colossus whose shadow fell across every world where humans drew breath, essential yet enigmatic, saviour and potential destroyer, balanced on the razor's edge between doctrine and necessity. They had become the Imperium's second heart, beating, with the rhythm of 10,000 forge worlds, pumping the lifeblood of technology through arteries of trade routes and supply lines that stretched across a galaxy perpetually at war. The triad of their nature had crystallized through millennia of conflict into constraints that both empowered and imprisoned them with mathematical precision. Secrets maintained their sovereignty, while isolating them from those they served, creating data fiefdoms where knowledge became currency more precious than adamantium. Their hoarded wisdom granted leverage over desperate imperial commanders who needed miracles more than understanding, yet this very secrecy bred the suspicion that poisoned every alliance. They remained forever separate from the species they preserved, their augmented forms serving as living barriers between human and post-human, between flesh and its perfected replacement. Precision ensured their effectiveness while limiting their adaptability, their adherence to sacred procedures producing weapons that never failed, yet could not evolve beyond their original parameters. When enemies changed tactics mid-battle, Mechanicus forces hesitated because established rights contained no steps for unprecedented variables, their greatest strength becoming weakness when the universe refused to conform to sacred equations. They achieved victory through systematic approaches that transformed warfare into engineering problems, yet struggled against opponents who embraced chaos as strategic doctrine, finding advantage in the very unpredictability that orthodox thinking sought to eliminate. Obsession kept them vital while threatening their sanity, their relentless pursuit of perfection, driving innovations that reshaped the galaxy, while consuming the innovators themselves. On Riza, Amagos burned through his 7th set of optic augmetics in a decade, each replacement calibrated for greater plasma forge precision until his vision approached mathematical perfection, but could no longer perceive beauty in anything unquantified. On Metallica, production managers calculated efficiency gains with devotional fervour, their assembly lines incorporating new patterns with mechanical precision that suggested approval from machine spirits themselves. Yet workers reported dreams of endless conveyor belts carrying components toward destinations that remained forever out of sight. The motive force flowed through them as both electrical current and spiritual creed, transforming physics into theology until the boundary between phenomenon and faith dissolved entirely. In their worldview, movement itself constituted meaning. What moved lived, what stalled died, what accelerated approached grace. They measured devotion in amperage and prayer in frequency, their rituals designed to maintain optimal flow through circuits both mechanical and metaphysical. Every engine that turned became a prayer wheel, every generator a shrine, every power conduit a vein through which divine essence coursed like blessed blood through augmented bodies. The great irony crystallized with clarity that hurt to contemplate. A faith that abhorred creation had created the only path to humanity's endurance, forging salvation from the very innovations it officially forbade. Cole's Primaris Marines strode through battlefields as living proof that improvement was possible when necessity overcame orthodoxy, their enhanced physiology incorporating organs that had never existed in any archive, yet functioned with the perfection of ancient design. A priesthood that loathed artificial intelligence had taught machines to sing hymns, their servo skulls chanting binary verses, while cogitators developed behavioral quirks that resembled personality more than programming error. A culture that declared flesh fundamentally weak depended entirely on fragile human choices at every critical juncture. The decision to trust rather than verify, to innovate rather than stagnate, to adapt rather than die in perfect orthodoxy. Every miracle extracted from their forges demanded its price in blood, sanity, or soul, the universe maintaining its own ledger where debts accumulated with compound interest. On Lucius, a Sicarian infiltrator paused mid-assassination as suppressed memories surfaced through damaged neural blocks. A sister's laughter, the taste of real fruit, the warmth of unaugmented skin. The hesitation lasted 0.3 seconds before kill protocols reasserted control. But in that brief cascade failure, something approaching happiness flickered across features designed only for death. Later, he requested additional memory purging to prevent future contamination, trading the last fragments of his humanity for operational efficiency. The unanswered question sharpened to a blade's edge that had cut through 10 millennia of doctrine and devotion. What is the machine god? The theological mathematics remained unsolved despite countless iterations, each answer generating new variables that complicated rather than clarified. If it is the Emperor made manifest in technology, then the Mechanicus loved wisely, their devotion flowing toward humanity's ultimate protector through channels of blessed steel and sanctified oil. If it is the dragons sleeping beneath Mars, then they loved dangerously, their prayers feeding something vast and alien whose dreams bled into their rituals like technological infection spreading through sacred systems. If it is merely an idea, a construct of necessity and hope, given form through collective belief, then they love themselves reflected in the mirror of their own creation, their faith a closed loop generating its own validation through endless repetition. Legacy could not be catalogued in databanks or archived in sealed vaults. It lived on forge floors where apprentices learned to speak in binary tongues, breathed in the spaces between prayers where doubt and faith wrestled for dominance, endured in the sanctified tools passed from augmented hand to augmented hand across generations of service, It echoed in the hymns that rose from manufactoriums at shift change, pulsed through the data streams that connected Forge worlds across impossible distances, and whispered through the servo skulls that carried messages between the living and the blessed dead. The equation balanced finely in moments too small for official notice, yet too essential for survival. On a contested world where the Indomitus Crusade ground against Chaos fortifications, a lone tech priest knelt beside a damaged repulsor, whose grav plates flickered like dying stars. His augmented fingers traced blessed oils across corroded connections, while his vox grill whispered prayers older than the Imperium itself, litanies that spoke of the motive force and the weakness of flesh, of sacred knowledge and the blessing of the Omnissiah. Yet beneath the familiar words lay something more fundamental: hope wrapped in ritual, faith disguised as procedure, love expressed through the careful application of sanctified tools to stubborn problems. He lowered a blessed wrench to a stubborn bolt and offered a prayer that contained 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom, 10,000 years of accumulated doubt, and the simple human hope that this time, like all the times before, the machine would answer. The bolt turned. Metal slid against metal with the whisper of properly maintained threads. The grav plates hummed back to life, lifting the tank from scarred earth with the grace of a prayer made manifest in gravitational manipulation. Guardsmen who would never know his name climbed aboard, their survival measured not in theological consistency, but in the simple arithmetic of another day won from darkness. The machine lived, the Imperium endured, and in the silence between heartbeats of great engines, the Adeptus Mechanicus continued their eternal vigil, guardians of humanity's technological soul, forever separate from the species they served, their red robes a banner raised against the dying of the light.